to our Turing-Roche Knowledge Share series. The aim of these monthly events are to bring together members of the Turing and Roche networks and the wider scientific community to hear different perspectives on topics in data science and build new connections. As the partnership research progresses, we also hope to showcase this at future events. So just to get started, I'm going to give a super quick overview of the partnership. Hopefully you can all see that slide. So the clues in the name, the partnership is between these two organizations. So the Alan Turing Institute, which is the UK's National Institute for Data Science and AI, and Roche, the leading pharma healthcare company. And we initially collaborated as two organizations through a data study group, which is a Turing-style hackathon, then a 12-week research project, and we formally launched our 5-year partnership in June 2021. This is our partnership North Star, so enabling the generation of insights to better understand patient and disease heterogeneity and its relevance to clinical outcomes at an unprecedented level of precision in order to improve clinical care. So ultimately, we're collaborating around this term kind of patient and disease heterogeneity. So why patients respond differently to treatment and why diseases manifest in different ways in different people. And we're doing this through advanced analytics. So as you can see from this aim, there's kind of a lot of different research areas we could explore over the 5 years. And we're kind of working our way through different activities. And you can find out more about these current activities on our partnership webpage, which you can find on the Turing website. And what is not kind of reflected on the slide is the connections and the collaborations we want to build. So it's really critical for us to be running events like these to get you all involved. So today's event theme is data and software engineering, an area that is key to the success of many data science projects and something we expect to be part of our partnership research going forward, a really kind of vital resource for us. So I'm really excited to hear how engineering teams function and develop tools at both Turing and Roche, and how both teams are kind of implementing best practices and open practices. So I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Martin O'Reilly, who is the Director of Research Engineering at the Turing Institute, and Dr. Daniel Sabanes Bove, who is the Associate Director of Statistical Engineering at Roche. And as mentioned, we'll be hearing from both our speakers, and then we should have plenty of time for questions at the end. So feel free to ask a specific question to an individual speaker, or you can ask a question for both of them to answer. And with that, I will now pass over to Martin if you want to get us started. You're on mute as well, Martin. The screen looks good.
There we go. So as Vicky said, I'm Martin O'Reilly. I'm Director of Research Engineering here at the Alan Turing Institute. And I lead the Turing's Research Engineering group, and I've led a similar group of developers and analysts in outside of academia previously. So the Research Engineering group at the Turing is a pool of 44 permanent research staff working across the Institute's research programs. And we've got 3 overlapping roles, each with a slightly different focus. So the first is research software engineers, and the research software engineers tend to focus on robust, reusable software. Our research data scientists generate trustworthy, reproducible analytics pipelines, and our research computing engineers work on flexible, reliable research infrastructure to support the Institute's research. And I think there's sort of key 3 features of the group's work that make it different from the classic research career path. So the first one is we're enablers of research. We don't have our own research agendas. We support the Institute's research priorities. We're sort of specialist generalists. We work across the Turing's programs, but we're often learning a new domain, a new methodology, or new technical skills with each project that we do. We're expert collaborators. We adapt and co-create our ways of working with each new project team that we join. And we're part of the connective tissue of the Institute, sort of linking across the programs and projects and forming part of the Institute's sort of institutional memory. But we don't just work on sort of research, we sort of try and bridge that gap to turn research into practice. And we work with the Institute's partners to apply and evaluate research in the real world. I like to sort of call this maybe lab trials to field trials. You can take something that shows promise on a toy data set or a simple problem, and then take it into a real world context in a realistic operating environment with real world data and see how well it works. And as we do that, we also look to advance the protectionist state of the art. You know, we openly publish our reproducible analyses of new methods, and we make those that work available as robust reusable software packages. And as we do all that, we're hopefully sort of learning from each other. You know, we'll learn some things about the domain from the practitioners, but they'll also sort of learn more about the sort of methods and research engineering practices from us. And I think the other main differentiator is that papers aren't our primary output. So we do co-author papers, but they're not what our careers are primarily judged on. And for us, our primary outputs are making research methods available as open reusable software, producing robust and reproducible data analytics pipelines and benchmarking various methods, making sort of research code more reliable and performant so that we can sort of scale our research better, and sort of upskilling the researchers and practitioners that we work with and the wider community in sort of good enough research engineering practices. And you know, the team sort of spends its time you know, across a range of activities at the Turing. So most of our time is spent on projects. We spend about 80% of our time collaborating with researchers and partners to sort of support the Institute's research agenda. And the rest of the time we spend supporting Turing researchers more broadly and engaging with the wider data science and research engineering communities. So I'll start with some of the projects, and as we're at a health knowledge share, I thought I'd start with some health ones. So here are some examples of some health projects we've been involved in recently. The first one's the Health Data Lab. So this is a collaboration between Turing and the Royal Statistical Society, and it's supporting the UK's Health Security Agency. And this was initially something that we did during COVID, but this has sort of grown to be sort of focused on the wider application of machine learning for policy-related research. We've got a learning machines project that's been running a few years. That's looking at deploying and monitoring machine learning in real world contexts. And we've got a collaboration with UCLH to sort of do that in the health context. And we've got a project on trustworthy synthetic data, not just in the health space, but we're evaluating the privacy and utility of synthetic data to try and reduce barriers for working with sensitive data. And on the health side, we're working again with University College Hospitals London to understand whether synthetic data can be useful enough to support some parts of the data science pipeline that currently require access to sensitive data, and to understand how much of the information from that sensitive data we can use to inform the generation of the synthetic version of the data without compromising on patient privacy. And the last example I wanted to talk about was the Data Safe Haven, which is a research infrastructure project. And this is a secure, scalable, cloud-based trusted research environment, which is a sort of computational environment to support the safe analysis of sensitive data. And this uses sort of an infrastructure as code approach so that we can have reproducible deployment of our environments. And this also makes it easy for other organizations to reuse our work. And we're working with the wider community to develop common standards for trusted research environments and to coordinate development efforts across the organizations working on them. And like I said, the team works across all of the Institute's research programs, not just health. So I wanted to give you a brief flavor of some of the other things that we sort of work on. So we've working on a digital twin of an underground farm that's set up in a disused London tube tunnel. We've been integrating electric vehicle charging data into models of the national grid to help better manage supply and demand. We're predicting the loss of sea ice from satellite imagery, developing a toolkit to use machine learning models to provide uncertainty estimates for sort of complex simulations, which can be very expensive to run computationally. And we're looking at working on Living with Machines project, which is looking at historical archives of newspapers, maps, and other texts to understand society's reaction to the introduction of machines during the Industrial Revolution. And then the last project I wanted to kind of highlight was working with NATS, which is the UK's National Air Traffic Service, to develop AI models to support decision-making by air traffic controllers. So as well as the project work we do, we spend the other sort of 20% of our time supporting the Institute's researchers more broadly with their research and engaging with the sort of wider data science and research engineering communities. And this tends to be in sort of one of three sort of broad areas. First is training and skills, where we do a mix of formal training and ad hoc support. So we formal courses in research software engineering and research data science, which we run live hybrid deliveries of once a year, primarily to the Turing's PhD enrichment students and postdoctoral researchers, but we also make them available for self-service online for anyone openly. And more recently, we've made a version of the research software engineering course focused on digital humanities researchers. And more informally, we run drop-in sessions for Turing researchers and provide support via Slack channels and GitHub and so on. The other main area we provide internal support for is the Turing's institutional research computing capability. So for the Turing, our on-premise supercomputer is the cloud, and some projects will include funding for cloud credits in their proposals, but we also have a large centrally funded pool of credits that Turing researchers can apply for to use for their research. The cloud's great because it lets researchers customize their compute infrastructure to fit their research. But often that's it's a slightly different approach to what you're used to on your laptop or traditional cluster. So the team provides some support for good practices and help people achieve what they're looking to do. We've also got access to several of the UK subnational supercomputers, and the team supports people with accessing those, including ones with GPU accelerators, which are used for modern deep learning methods. And we run the Turing's production data safe haven secure research environment for working safely with sensitive data. And finally, we run the Turing's GitHub organization, and this is where we host the code developed by the Institute's research community. A large fraction of this code is open, and all of the code that our team does is. And GitHub provides a sort of collaboration space, automated testing capabilities, and versioning for code to really make it easy to do some sort of the good enough best practices in research software engineering. The final strand of our non-project work is community engagement. We're active in the wider data science and research engineering communities. So we attend and give talks at workshops and conferences, both in the research engineering sphere and in the communities for the projects that we collaborate on. We share all our research outputs openly, including making code available under open source licenses on our GitHub organization. We contribute to the Turing Way, which is the Institute's handbook for collaborative, open, reproducible data science. And this is developed by the Tools, Practice and Systems program. And we're active members of the Society for Research Software Engineering, which is the professional society for all our roles. And we've got team members involved in society working groups. We've hosted and co-organized society events, and we've team members on the Society's Board of Trustees. Finally, we host a range of sort of external folk to come and work with us, from PhD students to civil service fast streamers, or even research engineers from other groups around the country. To come here and work with us on Turing projects, to collaborate and exchange knowledge. And finally, I wanted to finish maybe with a few words on sort of team organization and culture. So we're a large team of sort of 44 people, and we've grown a lot over the last sort of 6 years. And a key part of kind of keeping us sort of productive and connected is sort of our approach to sort of how we do our work and how we work together. So there's sort of three aspects of our team culture. One is open collaboration. I've talked a bit about how our project work is collaborative, and including working with our researchers and partners to sort of establish ways of working together. But we're also deeply collaborative in how we organize ourselves as the team. So we run a collective leadership team with myself and the principal level team members. We discuss and develop all our policies and processes and ways of working openly with the team, getting input from all the team members. And we collaborate with the wider research engineering community on sort of the development of the profession as a whole. So ways of working, career pathways, professional development. And the other sort of key value for us is empowerment. We want people to feel that they're sort of in control of the shape of their role and the work that they do. So we offer fully flexible hybrid working within the Institute's sort of wider policy. So within the team, projects permitting, you can work at home or in the office as you choose. There's the freedom to manage our own working week, fortnight, sort of even month. We strongly weight people's preferences when allocating projects. We don't just assign people to projects they have skills for, but we assign them on projects they're interested in and want to learn from. We give people 20% time, and 10% of that is free for them to spend on whatever they want for their own professional development, and 10% is to volunteer for one of the service areas the team supports, either for ourselves or the Institute. And we try and be as unhierarchical as we can, so anyone can lead on organizing something for the team or on many of our service areas. To give an example, the Turing's podcast was started by one of the team when they were a junior. And the final sort of value for us is learning and growth. So we're learning constantly from each other and our collaborators. The people in our team are from a wide range of backgrounds with different expertise, and we really strongly value that. We've got regular casual team lunches, coffee chats, and a weekly lunchtime tech talk that's open to the wider Institute. We've got annual away days and hack weeks to focus on professional development and work on how we organize and run ourselves as a team. There's support for attending both activities at the Turing, but also other more formal training courses, workshops, and conferences. And we've got a career, structured career path that's got junior, standard, senior, lead, and principal levels. And we give a strong priority to develop and progress staff through this pathway. So thanks for listening. I hope that's given you a flavor of research engineering at the Turing. I think, as Vicky said, we'll be having Daniel's presentation and then sort of picking up questions after that, if I'm right. Is that right, Vicky?
It is right. Thank you for doing that bit for me, Martin, actually. The reminder, you can ask any questions in the meantime. So Daniel, ready to hand over to you.
Great, thanks, Vicky. Okay, great. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so really an honor to be here, and very, very cool to hear from Martin. A lot of cool things about the RSE team at the Turing, so really exciting projects there. So hope this is not going to be too boring, but I have a lot of text on these slides, so I will try to not read all of that. But yeah, so first of all, I want to thank a lot of people within the Roche organization. You know, we have Sarah organizing this, I think, with Vicky together, and Chris also being the link to the Roche Turing, James and Ryan, and basically my kind of department. We have a lot of people from the team involved, and I will show you the slide later. There's a lot of other people involved from Roche side, and thanks to Vicky and also Ed, who I chatted before, who is in the RSE team as well. Okay, so basically how I see kind of what our statistical engineering team is doing is at this intersection of software engineering and biostatistics. So it's kind of a research software engineering team within biostatistics, but it's also, of course, in pharma. So it's also about this application to the development of new medicines. And that's a really like a sweet spot to be in. So I put here the heart because I really kind of enjoy this work very much. And it's kind of a dream job for me. So I want to tell you a little bit more about this. Why is this important, this working at this intersection? What's the team about, and how we structure it, a little bit similar what Martin also mentioned, how we're organizing ourselves, and then also kind of have a lot of focus on the open source collaboration, because that's getting more and more important for us and others as well. Okay, quick introduction. So just very, very briefly want to say a bit, how can biostatistics actually look like in pharma, because I know many people are not from pharma here, many are not from biostatistics. So what does it actually mean? If you look at the word clouds, there's a lot of course, terms coming up there, but they're different roles, right? And sometimes they're called biostatisticians, statistical programmers, there's different kind of data scientists, and so on. But in the end, there's also matched by kind of different departments that you find. Typically, this is called biometrics or biometry or data sciences, etc. But all of these have in common that we are all working with biological and often medical, so patient data from clinical trials or other sources. And we're practically analyzing, of course, these data sets, right? Or we're planning experiments to generate them in the first place. And of course, we collaborate with each other and importantly, also many other disciplines, right? So in particular, medical and biological scientists, medical doctors, regulatory experts, and so on. So we're not doing this in isolation. And okay, the point I want to make is, how do we analyze this data? Yeah, right. Not with this thing here that's called a calculator. Maybe you still remember those days. And we don't do this by hand, so we use software. Right. This can be proprietary software, open source software, but in the end, we need to write code in most cases ourselves, and it can be data wrangling or deriving data sets or trying different methods, setting up simulation studies, and so on. Right. So the bottom line here. There's basically no applied biostatistics without writing code. And yeah, probably in that regard, it's not so much different from many other research disciplines nowadays, but I think it's important to acknowledge this. Another point here I want to make is that from a company perspective, we also have a strategy, at least for the pharma side, to move towards open source solutions in general. So basically clinical reporting, so basically analyzing these medical data sets from clinical studies, that will be default in R from next year onwards. And that will be for the new molecules first, basically for the new medicines under development, and will then come to the other projects later. So at some point in the future, all of our clinical studies will be analyzed using R. We will still look at, of course, other solutions like SAS, Python, and so on to basically find the best tool for the task at hand. But we are doing this to basically allow a better blending of the data science roles. So we don't want to have like a strict separation, that this roles are only using SAS and the other roles are using R or Python or something. So everybody should kind of be fluent in R to some extent. So be able to work together fluently on the same code base. It's also, of course, driven by the new graduates from universities and schools already knowing R, but they don't maybe know any proprietary languages. So we don't need to skill them up on R too much. R is, of course, also a more modern function programming language compared to some other stuff. And in Shiny and Markdown, or recently Quarter, of course, very good value propositions there for R. And last but not least, we don't want to just change the language, but we really want to enable much more efficient ways of working, right? And we believe R can help us with this. Okay, so based on these 2 points, we are doing applied biostatistics, we need to write code, we are anyway moving towards open source. So why should we then take software engineering seriously in this field? Because basically this code is critical to the business, right? So most of the stuff we write ourselves. It's not that we have an external vendor writing it for us. Again, using R more and more, that's going to be increasing this code even more. We need to scale up the analysis codes, use the multiple projects to be reliable enough, extensible, adaptable, reproducible, and all of these important adjectives, right? So it needs to be intuitive when new people join in, scalable when we have larger data sets, and maintainable is also very important, right? We don't want to have like one-off projects and then nobody can maintain it afterwards, and it's just like kind of ends up in the bin, kind of. We don't want that. Another aspect to know about, and I will not go into detail, is that, of course, the pharma industry is well-regulated industry, and the software might also need to be validated on the systems that it's installed. So no details here, but in the end, that also means the code needs to be well-developed, tested, and documented. And that we anyway want, with or without regulation, but it's adding another requirement to this list, basically. Okay, and last but not least, of course, this takes experience and time doing this. And yeah, what's a good recipe for this? If you look at XKCD comics, you'll find some funny cartoons about this that basically never end up with good code. So fortunately, we believe we can end up with writing good code. And here, again, I want to make the connection also to Martin's talk. Research software engineering, RSE, can help a lot. And it's a well-known field in academia by now. It has developed during the last 10 years. Less so far in the industry, but basically we want to apply best coding practices, right? So things like version control, code review, unit testing, integration tests, continuous integration, reproducible analysis pipelines, etc. All of these good practices we can apply. RSE can help here, and the teams that are dedicated to doing RSE themselves, they can of course cultivate these best coding practices as a kind of center of excellence. Really develop this cross-project backbone code that I mentioned before, really scale this up from individual project code, and really avoid this time-intensive copy-pasting, adapting code between projects. And last but not least, work together with other companies and of course academia as it makes sense on open source packages, right? That's very cool. And here we basically just want to share a little bit our experience in building such an RSC and biostatistics team at Roche, right? Okay, so a bit about the team. So what's the mission? It's a long sentence, but basically it's about co-creating tools, and we want to accelerate either new statistical methods or analysis of new data types. So this can be kind of new biomarker data, typically in the health space, or could also be digital data and so on that comes in. And in the end, why do we want to do this? Because we want to enable project teams to really get actionable insights, right? And thereby maximize the impact. So it's not just about us having fun developing stuff, but in the end, it needs to be impactful for the projects. And I think there's also a link here to the mission of the Turing-Roche collaboration. Okay, so what's the remit? Statistical software tools, and these are typically at the moment R packages, Shiny modules, or how-to templates. And we, of course, aim to build high-quality tools, fulfill all these before-mentioned requirements. The users are typically coming from our own data science department, but can come from the whole organization. Focus on R is, again, driven by this department strategy I mentioned before, but we're also, for example, using Stan or C++ inside R packages to speed up things or to enable MCMC. We're also exploring, for example, currently Julia for some special modeling tasks. Some example products here on the R package side, and all of these except this one, which is a biomarker one. This is closed source. All the others are open source already. You can find them. So Hermes, for example, is for RNA-seq data analysis. RBMI, reference-based multiple imputation. CA-impact, that's for dose escalation in early phase trials. Mixed model for repeated measures, that's very specific statistical model widely used for longitudinal outcomes. Turn.mmm, that's another layer on top of MMM, basically to make it even easier to report tables and graphs. And PS42, for example, that's was actually recently presented to FDA statisticians. That's for propensity score-based dynamic borrowing of historical control data. So basically all of these are, again, all of these are open source. I will say more about that. And all of these are also co-creations with the experts, right? Again, making the link to Martin's talk. We're never really developing this stuff alone, right? It's always a collaboration, right? So for example, RBMI was close collaboration with the actual molecule team that needed this, plus the methods experts, plus academic expert. CA-impact, that's currently being developed with two other companies, plus Cambridge University. Plus we have internal, again, project experts that are also interested in developing this further. MMM, that's another cross-company project. And we developed this actually to support a specific project, but then we kind of scale this up, solving the general problem, and so on, right? So these are all kind of co-creation projects. Okay, so who's behind now the statistical engineering team? So just showing here the names and the photos. And we currently have 14 members. And in terms of full-time equivalents, around 6 full-time equivalents. So you see most of the members are not full-time working in our team, but they're having basically duties in other projects. And I will say a bit more about that. So that's basically this rotation concept that we follow a lot. And what does it mean? So basically, these are people from other groups. They work maybe on maximum 50% percentage in our team. They come from a different mix of levels and backgrounds. But this really adds to kind of the diversity of the team. And of course, we also supervise internships and master students, for example, on interesting projects. What are the advantages of this? We kind of stay connected to the business because we're not kind of a secluded group. We build on an increased internal expertise by basically skilling up folks in our team, and then they can go back after some time if they need it in their home project, exporting the skill sets there. And of course, we also enable a diverse career paths for data scientists or statisticians in pharma here. Some challenge with this, of course, the speed is sometimes a bit maybe limited because we only have a few long-term members acting as leads here. Finding strong candidates, of course, we have a certain technical bar. People need to be familiar with R already, otherwise it doesn't work and so on. But we're still pretty patient in onboarding folks in the beginning. So we don't say, oh, you need to have developed already 10 R packages or something like that. Another important thing here, also a little bit mentioned by Martin to some extent, are the ways of working. So we try to follow a little bit the agile principles here, where it's, for example, about individuals and interactions. We prefer, for example, chat rooms and meetings. We avoid emails as much as we can, over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation. So tests, of course, very important to keep the software always working, prove that it's working, automatically generate documentation. Customer collaboration over contract negotiations. So we work with this user input, again, this co-creation with the business from the start to the end. And very important, responding to change over following a plan. So we really don't actually have long-term plans, but we only have like a strategic direction. And the projects themselves are rather short. So they're not like multi-year projects, but typically it's like maximum maybe a year for like a project. And that allows us to quickly change course as needed. We work in product-specific sub-teams, usually on Kanban boards, keeping the overview, and then having those frequent stand-up meetings to check in, remove blockers, touch base. Yeah, needless to say, of course, continuous integration through the tests and so on, and GitHub Actions and so on. That's also actually important. We are supported there by a separate horizontal team, so we don't have to do all of this infrastructure preparations ourselves. Okay, a few words on open source collaboration. That's very important for us. And why do we actually invest in open source? We have a lot of direct value from open source. Very important is attracting new talents, maintaining the high quality bar for our tools, because we need to pass the external scrutiny and reviews. Very important that this really enables synergistic collaboration with other companies and academic institutions. On the contrary to that, we have mixed experience when we want to work on closed source collaborations. That's usually much more difficult because contracts need to be set up and so on. That slows things down a lot. It's much easier to just share things and then, you know, use the reciprocity advantage that comes with that. Regulators can use and trust our tools. That's very important. And actually, it's not just regulators, it's also other stakeholders, basically society as a whole in the end, but also, of course, patient groups or payers that could all be kind of looking at our fingers there and really looking what we are doing with these tools. That's very, very good. Indirect value, thought leadership on critical topics, basically shaping the environment, of also the opportunity to define industry standards together across companies and institutions. And this comes back to the talents again. For retainment of talents, also good to have these publications so we can make it attractive for the authors there. Here I want to mention a very important new umbrella for the open source efforts here in biostatistics, which is the Software Engineering Working Group, short SWE, and it's associated currently with the ASA pharmaceutical section. We're also soon affiliated probably with EFSPI, the European counterpart, and of course also connected with the other relevant efforts in the space. For example, our consortium. And we already have 30 members from more than 20 organizations already, and we are open for new members, and you don't have to be an ASM member to join. So please consider that if you're interested. What are the objectives of this working group? So we want to really engineer those statistical tools which have been missing so far in our toolbox. The first product here is MMM, already briefly mentioned before. And secondary objective is to really promote these best practices, right? So that really get this into awareness in people's minds that it's not just coding quickly something on the side. You really need to take this seriously. And how do we do this? What are the good practices for engineering these tools? How does this fit together, the software engineering working group and statistical engineering team? So basically, there's this internal, external side of statistical engineering. There will always be internal projects that maybe need to stay internal for one reason or the other. There will always be internal extension packages which touch on internal APIs or other sources. So it's okay and fine and will not go away. But on the other hand, we have much more and more external facing work, either projects that we open source after developing them internally, like RBMI, or things that we developed internally and then open sourced, and then others jump on the train and work with us together, for example, here with CMPAC. And then with the working group now, as a new umbrella facilitating those collaborations, we also will have increasingly more joint new projects from the start that are basically together with others from beginning to maintenance mode, basically, right? Okay, quick outlook. Open source programming languages get more and more important within pharma. We think that's a huge opportunity, again, last but not least, to really change the way of working and get the synergy across companies where it doesn't touch any intellectual property, but where it's really like about just making it easier for everybody. But it needs to be handled with care. So we think that this increased focus on software engineering, taking this seriously is important. And working across organizations, again, that's really key. That's really key to become more efficient. The key to get industry standards, the key to get the buy-in from regulators, and again, also then improve the products in the end over closed source proprietary solutions. So yeah, that's what I have. Thanks a lot. And yeah, I just put some references here, and I guess the slides will be shared later, so you can also then look at that in more detail.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Get started on the Q&A session. So the main question that kind of came through in a couple of different forms actually was about how do you prioritize projects that come in? What tools do you use to prioritize those projects? So a question for both of you, but Martin, I don't know if you want to kick that off first.
Sure, it's hard. So, you know, the Institute's got a lot of research. I'm not sure what fraction of projects we're involved with, but it's by no means all of them. And yeah, there's for us, we've got a monthly process. We work closely with the project management unit who support the programs with their overall research program, and we try and evaluate basically which projects we can add the most value to and which will sort of have the most impact for the Turing. That's not something we can decide on our own, but you know, we're able to sort of talk to programs and the research leadership about that. Yeah, so it's tricky, especially when there's lots and lots of projects on. So I think something we might, yeah. So I'd be interested to sort of hear how it is at Roche.
Yeah, it's important question. I think maybe we're even less formalized yet than Martin, because we're just like a year old now, so we're a relatively recent team. But for us, it was in the first year, it was mostly about actually making advertisement for our team internally, that actually people know that we exist and know that there is such a team doing this. So that took quite a lot of our time, and so that's also important to that people realize when they come to this kind of problems, or when they have this kind of challenge. Oh, now they have some code, maybe they want to use it for a clinical trial, or they realize, they would copy paste stuff, but maybe then hopefully we get into people's heads and ring a little bell and say, oh, wait, there's statistical engineering. Maybe I can work with them to scale this up into a package or something. That's the first important thing, to actually get those interesting project proposals in the first place. And then once we get them, of course, it's about impact, like, how many, for example, therapeutic areas this touches, or how many users might use this in the end. Like if it's only like 1 or 2 people, probably it's not worth it. But if it's more like 10 or 20 or so, then yeah, it gets really interesting. And also around like how mature is the methodology that we want to package there? Is it maybe too early to package it up in a kind of software? Is it maybe not necessary because there's already external solutions that we can just use from open source? And then also the effort, like, is it maybe a small fix of something that already exists? Is it maybe just writing like a template? or is it like a whole package from scratch, right? So that also comes in, and there are also this additional resources maybe from the business groups via rotations can help to make this happen.
Great, thanks both. Daniel, I think you asked Martin as well what percentage of projects that you receive that you actually end up working on. Martin, I don't know if you have a percentage for that, or if you want to share that.
So I think it's a hard number to figure out. So we've got one of the sort of senior or above people in the team who connects in with each of the programs as their kind of primary contact. So I think a lot of possible projects start out as a coffee conversation, and many don't go past that. And then we only see the ones where some work's gone in. So I think that's one of the things that's evolved over time. Is in the early days, it was very much the same as Daniel was just describing. We're sort of letting people know we're here. We've got some free at point of use kind of effort, which we still sort of have a bit of, but not much. And people would sort of come and talk to you about everything. And actually, for at one point, every project talked to me. sort of back when I was sort of deputy, but then when you get sort of bigger, that doesn't really scale. We also get want to be a bit clearer about sort of what makes a good kind of collaboration for what we can help most with, and so we sort of have those initial conversations which are quite distributed. And then if it feels like it might be a good fit, there's a bit of work to kind of work up a proposal. Often that's before sort of a funding sort of request goes in, or it might be after a project's funded. But a big part of that will be working together on what would a good contribution be. And if we're confident enough there's something there, and we're aligned on sort of practices and what the impact is, then we'll sort of agree to do it, and then part of the project will be kind of more concretely shaping sort of what that work is, as Daniel says, sort of learning as we go.
Great, thank you. And a question about, again, for both of you, do you have any kind of specific data stewardship projects? So Daniel, I know maybe you can kick us off, because I know there's a lot of kind of data assets at Roche.
So that would probably not be so much in our scope, I think, data stewardship. I think there's of course many other teams at Roche in a similar kind of area, right? And there's groups focusing, for example, just to mention, right? There's groups just focusing on data sharing, right? Make it possible for external researchers to analyze Roche clinical trials after following certain proposals and procedures there, right? There's of course also the whole other kind of internal secondary use of data, which is like a huge project, and then it's there's a lot of people involved there, and then there's kind of also specific teams working on specific use cases and so on. So that's I think, if I understand correctly, that's maybe a bit more this data stewardship, but that's not so much our scope, I would say. Which is really more on the methods implementation, or really analyzing then this biomarker data, right? Making the tools available so that others can actually more easily look into this important data sets.
I feel like that's similar for Turing as well, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think most projects at the Turing sort of still have very sort of project-specific data access, but I think we do recognize the sort of value of making the work we've done to make research data research ready is important as an outcome itself. And there are some other similar sorts of roles evolving around the Turing that aren't sort of so engineering focused. And one of those is we've got a small data steward, sort of they call themselves data wranglers team, sort of standing up alongside some community managers, research application managers, who are more about connecting the work into potential users and contributors. And they're very much focused on this idea of, well, are there data sets that, what's the challenge of going from raw data set to data set you can effectively analyze, and how do you, and that connects into some things we've hit in our research projects and reproducibility practices around provenance and sort of tracking that transformation and cleaning sort of unwrangling process. We're not at the point where the Turing would consider itself as sort of a host for sort of data science data sets. And I mean, we physically live in the British Library, and they're probably better placed than us for that. But I think we are, this idea of data as a product, as a reusable, research output that becomes an input to other research, is, I think, something that we collectively could get a lot better at.
Great. And then the next question, again, I think this is for Martin, but I think this could work for both of you, about kind of what QA processes do you have in place, and any recommendation on how these can be adopted by academic teams who often struggle in this area.
Go ahead, Martin.
Yeah, I think this is one of the, so there's a range of, we try and sort of draw a distinction when we work with researchers and practitioners about sort of best practices for people who are paid to be software engineers and data scientists, and sort of good enough practices. And I think one of the key things when the code you write is got one purpose, which is to do some analysis, wrangle some data, do some analysis, and gain some insight, to publish that scientific insight. You sort of think of it as a one-off investment. At any point in time, you're sort of still working out what the code's doing. So and we see, even as professionals, that there's a spectrum of when it feels right to start formalizing sort of testing. So, we go through periods of, hang on, is this thing even possible? Let's play around for an afternoon or a few days as software engineers. Interestingly, we find our research data scientists tend to bring sort of formal testing frameworks in sort of later in the process, because I think a lot of the work is exploratory analysis to sort of get the shape of the data. But I think there's different sort of ranges of testing that you can do. And one we found quite powerful with researchers that works from the start is, I've done something, I've decided that's okay. Well, why don't I just save that result? And then as I tweak my code, I'll just check that it's still giving me the same answer as before. It's not, you haven't invested a big heap of work in sort of saying, how do I make my code robust under all circumstances? How am I sure it's the right answer? You've sort of taken a professional judgment that it's a reasonable outcome. Maybe it's a plot, maybe it's a table. And you say, if it's identical or similar enough, then I haven't broken anything. And I'll evaluate whether it's giving me a sensible answer to my next question. And if it is, then I'll save that as another test. And then gradually you get a sort of suite of what we call regression tests, these things that protect you against breaking things that were working before. And you're not really proving it's working, but you're showing at least that the thing you were happy with before hasn't become different. And I think that's something that researchers, even writing fairly throwaway code, or one purpose code, can gain benefit from immediately. I'd also make a stronger argument that having confidence in our research outcomes, even if your primary output is the paper or the research insight, is critical. And the more and more code contributes to that, the more it's important to make sure that we haven't accidentally shot ourselves in the foot.
No, I completely agree with what Martin said. That I think before saying what actually QA process we follow, I think it's important to think about every kind of writing of code in some sense is software engineering in some sense, right? Maybe without good practices in the first place, but all of this writing of code, even if it's just an analysis script or a pipeline that can benefit from every kind of QA or testing or refactoring approaches, and that's also something we want to, hopefully with this new software engineering working group, we want to kind of make it aware in the specific community that we work in biostatistics. And yeah, hopefully also the collaboration with Turing and RSE Society and so on can maybe even also synergize with that, right? And in terms of the concrete, let's say, products that we are building, often what we do is if there is, for example, an existing proprietary software that produces results, and we kind of believe that in the first place to be pretty correct, right? So then we also do a lot of cross-checking with that and basically building that into an integration test as part of the package. so that we are sure that we basically under different installations and so on, different operating systems, we can reproduce those numbers. That's, for example, one important thing to do. And yeah, generally we try, of course, have small functions and test all the functions, even if it's just internal and all those kinds of approaches. But but I think it's important to realize that it's not just for the big packages, but also for small things. It can be very useful.
Great, thanks both. A bit of a spicy tangent, I would maybe say. So programs that autonomously write code are making a lot of advances, e.g. OpenAI's GPT-3. Do you think this tech will one day be applied to bioinformatics? And I'm going to combine this with another question as well about how do you see this area developing over the next 5 years, kind of big developments, and how will these impact the work of data scientists? So a big question about the future for whichever one of you wants to attempt to tackle that first.
That's a difficult one. Maybe
Yeah.
Martin can go first because he's a bit closer to the whole AI space than I am.
Yeah, so I tend to sit on the sort of skeptical end, but it has been the lunchtime topic for the last fortnight, and there's been some surprisingly coherent, and sensible outcomes. Yeah, so I think this idea of an AI assistant, might go somewhere. I think we're, this question of what does good enough look like? That might be an interesting place to sort of, maybe not just give a straight no, which is, I think if you were to say, how do I get confident that this large language model has, this big black box, millions or billions of parameter model has, is generating sort of quality code that I can rely on to make judgments about the safety of, some medicine, that feels like a very high bar to me, and it feels potentially like the work to, like we talk a lot about how even when we're looking at code we've written ourselves some time ago, it can take a while to figure out what's going on. And I think, checking clever code is harder than writing clever code. And one of the reasons to write simple code and write small functions and so on is so that we can look at it and go, oh, I understand what that does. And then we can zoom out and go, well, here's the list of things it's doing. If they're all doing what I think they're doing, that's sensible. I can hold that in my head. And then I can go and validate each of those steps separately. And I think if, that validation is still going to be needed in high stakes environments, or it's going to be a very, we're going to need to figure out something harder, which is the automated evaluation of the quality of code, which I don't think we have working at the moment. But could the tool, could this sort of pattern matching, be a sort of much more sophisticated Google or Stack Overflow that brings you back a very common or a set of potential patterns to use for something that you can eyeball and go, oh yeah, that looks really good. That's the thing I was kind of thinking about, but couldn't quite figure out sort of how it went. But yeah, I mean, we're quite far away from what I would call sort of high stakes production use in most of what we do, whereas I think Daniel's team and Roche work sort of, the biostatistics, the statistical engineering is kind of a much higher stakes, when you're sort of deciding, is the outcome of this drug trial that this is safe to continue using on humans or effective, for treating a disease. Those are big decisions to make. So
that's true. But I have to say, I would love to have like an assistant AI coding thing that I can say, for example, oh, here's my coding problem, just a very small one, this is my inputs, this are my expected outputs, this is my test, maybe I write anyway in the beginning or something in a kind of test-driven development paradigm. And then the AI can just make a good first proposal, and then I can tweak it a little bit, and then I'm done. If that can save me like, half an hour, and it only takes like 10 minutes instead of 40 minutes or something like that, that would be great. So, but I don't see in the near future anything that can work on, let's say, high level products, right? It will probably be still small scope, but that could be very useful.
Thank you both. I just realized we're a minute to the end. That has flown by. We've got some extra questions, so I will post them in the Slack which Martin and Daniel are both in, so feel free to post any extra ones in there as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you both for such brilliant talks.